So this weekend, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of Canada's Conservative Party, made a big announcement that could impact housing if he, of course, wins, becomes prime minister, and what he is calling the Canada First reinvestment tax cut. Basically, he's proposing that any capital gains that investors make on their investments, they will not have to pay tax on them right away. They could defer that tax provided they reinvest that money in Canada. How can this impact and shape Canada's housing market? That's what we're going to chat about today. My name is John Pasalis. My team and I help buyers and sellers throughout the Toronto area make smarter real estate decisions. If you'd like to meet with me and my team, you can just click the link in the show notes below or shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly. So, big announcement, of course, that could have an impact on the housing market. So in Canada, of course, like in most countries, I mean, when you sell an investment, you have a gain on it that's considered a capital gain. You have to pay tax on that. The taxes paid are preferential; they're lower than, of course, personal income tax. But there are still taxes that are applied to capital gains. Now, what Poilievre's proposing is let's put a hold on those taxes. Let's allow people to avoid paying tax right away, provided they reinvest into other Canadian investments. So rather than me interpreting it, why don't we just hear him describe his own proposal in his own words, and we'll come back and chat a little bit about it.
Today I am announcing a plan to unlock billions of dollars in reinvestment to build Canada into an economic fortress against American threats. I will axe the tax on reinvestments in Canada. Here's how it works. Anyone who sells an asset will pay no capital gains tax on whatever proceeds they reinvest in Canada. People can choose to reinvest into Canadian businesses, Canadian stocks, Canadian farms, Canadian home building, and other Canadian investments, fully tax deferred. Companies will get the same tax deferral on any proceeds of sale they reinvest here in Canada. Canadians will only pay capital gains tax on accumulated gains when they cash out for good or take their money out of Canada. This tax break will be available for any capital gains reinvested between July 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2026. But if it causes as big an economic boom as I expect, you know what? I'll make it permanent.
So we got to hear some, obviously his take on what he's doing. His proposal, at least on their website, their video is very thin on details. So we don't know exactly how this would be applied, what limitations, constraints, restrictions there would be. But right now they're making it very broad, making it sound like whatever reinvestments you make in Canada will be tax deferred. Capital gains will not apply. Now, we have to look at, some potential good things behind this policy, how it might help the market, and I think some potential downsides of how it can have a negative impact on the market. So think about the positives. The first is this could have a very big impact on construction of purpose-built rental housing in Canada. Canada's condo market is largely frozen right now. New buildings are not seeing pre-sales. Investors aren't buying, and users are buying. The prices that builders need to sell at versus what buyers can afford to buy. There is just too big of a gap there. But with some policies like tax incentives to build purpose-built rental, we're seeing some projects being converted to purpose-built rental. One of the challenges, of course, is not every builder wants to be in the business of being a landlord. Many builders are really just builders. They build housing, they profit off housing, they move on to their next project. So what this tax deferral plan does is it encourages builders to actually build purpose-built rental housing, and then after completion to sell it to a company that would manage it over the long term. It allows the builder to defer their taxes, provided they reinvest it potentially in more purpose-built rental construction. For me, this is a decent policy. It's a good policy because it encourages more housing supply. It encourages permanent rental housing. There are a lot of positive side effects. I mean, some progressives will say this is just a tax break to big builders, which obviously it is. But you need big builders to be making money to encourage them to build housing. They're not doing it if they're losing money or there's no profit. So I think this is an example of where you can give tax breaks that provide an incentive to builders to build the type of housing Canada needs, of course, which is part of it is permanent purpose-built rental housing. So this could have a lot of lift. as some builders are contemplating or considering converting their what were to be condominium projects into permanent purpose-built rental projects. So I think that is kind of the one positive side effect. And again, there are probably many others, but I'm just kind of using one as an example. And I'm not even going to talk about other industries. Now, when we think about potential negative side effects, I think the one big one, of course, is how this impacts Canada's obsession with buying condos and houses as an investment property. Over the past 15 to 20 years, the share of homes and condos in Canada that are owned by investors rather than end users has been increasing, which is why Canada's home ownership rate is declining because fewer young people can afford to buy a home. The share of homes sold every year bought by investors is increasing. End users' share of ownership is declining. So we've had this transition over the past 10 to 20 years where more homes are bought as investments, which I think is having two negative side effects. One is it's making it harder for first-time buyers to actually buy a home because there are fewer homes actually available, despite building more housing. Few are available to be bought by end users. It's driving prices up and making it harder for end users to compete for this next generation that wants to buy their own first home. So I think this is one significant negative side effect. The other is, of course, it is encouraging investments into what I would say are, I mean, not even me, a lot of economists say this, a lot of academic economists, like into investments that are extractive, that do not add value, they kind of take value out. So it's very different from encouraging businesses to invest in businesses, corporations, factories that create jobs. You know, buying and sitting on a home does not create jobs. Some argue it creates housing, but I mean, it really doesn't because the home would have been built one way or another. It's just not going to be built and bought by an end user, a family, or an investor. So it's not really adding anything. And I think this is part of the reason why Canada's productivity is among the worst among the OECD. I don't think these are healthy investments. So what this tax break does to potentially is that it makes buying homes and hoarding homes even more lucrative. And it really helps the people who are already in the market, who already have accumulated a ton of housing, to basically continue that and gives them a tax advantage because many investors will oftentimes buy properties, eventually sell them when they think they've kind of maximized the gain on that particular property and recycle that into another one. Well, if they don't have to pay capital gains, it really just supercharges that activity because people have a lot more money to work from. So what will likely end up happening under this type of policy is that we'll continue down this road where even more homes are being converted to long-term investments from small corporations, individuals, large corporations buying them, making it harder for younger people to buy a house. Again, the housing supply advocates is a good idea because they don't really prioritize home ownership. They think it's just housing's just a supply issue, a very different mindset. Obviously, supply is important, but when you're selling off most of your supply to investors, it's not really a system that helps the next generation actually buy a home of their own, which I think is important. So I think this could have a massive negative side effect on housing affordability. And I think one important thing to keep in mind is that this policy is obviously geared towards the boomer vote, you know, people who have accumulated tons of assets and could benefit from a policy like this. But it is doing so at the expense of the younger generation who this policy would hurt because it would, again, like I said, supercharge the role that housing investment plays in Canada, making it harder for the next generation to even get into the market. Now, we have to look at criticisms of my take, and I'll just bring up one example because I appreciate feedback and criticism. This is a comment or tweet from Daniel Foch, who argued that I have the wrong take, that 55 plus boomers hold more than 50% of all investment properties, and this gives them an improved incentive to liquidate and rotate into another more passive asset for retirement. So the idea here, what Daniel appears to be arguing, is that this will not result in more accumulation, from boomers. It'll actually result in less because they're going to all want to sell their properties and invest in passive investments. Now, I think there's a couple of challenges with this narrative. Number one is that we have to think about what the most likely policy setup would be. What kind of Daniel and some other commentators are suggesting is that you'll be able to sell any type of investment and invest in any other type of asset, tax free or tax deferred, as long as it's Canadian. Sell your real estate and buy Canadian stocks or Canadian ETFs. That is, and all of that will be tax deferred. That is a very extremely unlikely scenario. I cannot imagine that the federal government, even on the conservatives, is going to allow people to invest in passive, ETFs, stocks, mutual funds, tax deferred capital gains until they basically get out of the market. Is a very, very unlikely scenario. Even when we look at what's going on in the US is a very similar program, but you have to invest in similar types of properties. I mean, specifically, you have to invest in real estate. You cannot sell real estate, defer that tax, and then go buy some stocks. It is not happening. Stocks don't qualify under this program. So this idea that all of a sudden the boomers are just going to want to sell everything and put them in passive investment is very unlikely. Now, let's just say the world that kind of Daniel's proposing that this applies to any investment, any Canadian investment, including passive stocks, ETFs, these types of things that he's suggesting, rather than more active investments and physical investments. Let's just say that's true. The next question, of course, is does this tax benefit make investing in real estate more or less attractive? Sure, even in that world where people can just transfer money from one investment to another and save on the capital gains, you might have some people selling, but the issue is what is the net effect? Are more people rushing in to invest than those exiting or less? And I tend to think that these tax incentives pull more money in. They don't discourage people from investing. So this idea that the net effect is going to be fewer investors owning homes, and all of a sudden is this new utopia for end users because have so many more properties to buy, is an unrealistic outcome. Again, these tax advantages typically pull capital in. They do not lead people to just effectively liquidate and get out of the investment altogether. So I think that is an unlikely scenario. I think, again, the more likely outcome is that we're going to have more consolidation of housing into the hands of the few rather than the many. Some people think that is a perfect vision for Canada. I tend not to. So take my opinions with a grain of salt. We all have our own biases. I don't think that's a good path that we're on in Canada. I think we should be moving towards a path where more of our housing stock that are built to be owner occupied are actually owned by end users. I think we should be moving towards a path where governments are discouraging hoarding houses as a lucrative investment and encouraging investments that create value and that create jobs. I think these two things are very related. How we invest money, how it's impacting the next generation, and how it is impacting Canada's economy and productivity. So I think this would have a very negative effect on Canada's economy and on households in particular, younger ones trying to get in. But again, these are just proposals. We don't know how they will all play out. And of course, we have a big election coming up, and we'll have to see who ends up winning. And maybe as they announce more announcements, we'll take a look at the different announcements coming from Carney and from Poilievre to sort of unpack some of the differences and some of the positives. And like I said, I think if governments or if Pierre's government was to win, they limit it to purpose-built rental housing or different sectors rather than single-family homes or condos. I think that would be a positive thing because it stimulates more supply. But overall, a negative effect when it comes to single-family owner-occupied type housing. If you have any questions, comments, please put them in the comment section below or shoot me an email at askjohn@moosesmartly.com.